I'm secretly dating my coach. Stop, I said almost breathless. The locker room was eerily quiet except for the sound of our heavy breathing. The rest of the team had cleared out after practice, but I was still here. Why was I still here? The answer to that question was on my neck. He'd asked me to stay behind again, more extra sessions, more time alone. I wasn't exactly complaining, but the risk was starting to gnaw at me. Unable to take it anymore, I turned to face him and his eyes met mine. Instantly, my heart skipped a beat. There he was, Jackson, still in his coaching gear, dark hair slightly damp from the pool, his green eyes locking on me like a magnet. "What?" he asked, taking a step closer. I could feel the heat rising in my chest. "What if someone comes in? What if someone sees us?" Jackson smirked, a playful glint in his eyes. "No one's coming in, Archie. The team's gone, and the faculty doesn't check in this late." I glanced at the door nervously, knowing he was right, but still feeling that creeping anxiety. Still, it's risky. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us until I could feel his warmth on my skin. His hand reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair away from my forehead. "You're overthinking again," he said softly. I shivered at the touch, and my brain went all hazy. "Yeah, well, this is risky, Jackson. If anyone finds out, I could get kicked out, and you could lose your job, your everything." Jackson's fingers trailed down my cheek softly, setting my skin on fire. "Then don't think about it," he murmured. I froze for a moment, my heart thudding so loud I was sure he could hear it. The logical part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, to push him away and walk out of that locker room. But the rest of me wanted this. I wanted him. Without another word, his lips were on mine, soft at first, testing like he was waiting for me to pull back. But I didn't. I couldn't. I leaned into the kiss, feeling his arms wrap around me, pulling me closer. My mind went blank, and all I could focus on was the warmth of his body, the taste of his lips, the way everything else seemed to disappear when I was with him. His hands roamed down my back, pressing me tighter against him as the kiss deepened. I let out a soft sigh, any and all thoughts in my mind quickly fading. This was wrong, so wrong, but it felt so good I couldn't bring myself to stop. "Jackson," I whispered between kisses. I wanted to lose myself in this moment, but it wasn't easy. My mind was racing as his lips moved to my jaw, then my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I moaned. "This is exactly what you want," he finished for me, his voice dripping with confidence. I couldn't argue. How could I when my hands were gripping hard on him, pulling him closer, needing more? Despite all my worries, I couldn't control myself. I couldn't get enough of him. He was right. This was exactly what I needed. His lips crashed against mine again, harder this time. He held me like I would disappear if he let go. All my fears, all my worries were forgotten as I lost myself in him. Every touch, every kiss felt like a dangerous secret we were sharing, and I knew this couldn't last. But for now, I didn't care. For now, I just wanted him. I still don't get how I ended in this situation, or maybe I remember exactly how I got into it. I remember the day I got the acceptance letter like it was yesterday. A few months ago. It was months ago. I was sitting in my room staring at my computer screen, refreshing my email for the 100th time. My heart nearly stopped when I saw the subject line, "Congratulations." My hands were shaking as I opened the email. The first thing I saw was the name of the university, my dream university, the place that represented everything I'd been working for. I couldn't believe it. I was in. "Mom, I got in," I shouted, practically leaping out of my chair. She came running into my room, and the look on her face was worth everything. We hugged, cried, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. Only the chosen few get selected to go to this university. The fact that I got in felt nothing less than a miracle, a dream that I never wanted to wake up from. I felt like the best thing that had ever happened. Well, until the day my eyes locked on those damn green eyes. About 5 months ago. When I first heard we were getting a new swim coach, I didn't think much of it. Coaches came and went, and I'd learned not to get too attached, but Jackson was different. The first time I saw him, I knew this guy was going to change everything. He walked into the pool area with a confidence that made everyone stop and stare. He was tall, well-built, with long black hair tied back in a ponytail, and these piercing eyes that seemed to look right through you. He didn't waste any time with introductions. He just picked up the clipboard and started barking orders like he'd been our coach for years. At first, I didn't know what to make of him. He was tough, no nonsense, and he expected nothing less than perfection from everyone on the team. But there was something about him that drew me in. Maybe it was the way he pushed me harder than any coach ever had before. Or maybe it was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. The extra session started not long after he joined. I finished my regular training with the rest of the team, and just when I thought I could relax, Jackson would call me over. "Archie, stay behind," he'd say. It wasn't a request, it was a command, and I never said no. At first, the extra sessions were brutal. He had me swimming lap after lap, correcting my form and pushing me to go faster, longer, harder. But after a while, I started to crave those sessions, not just because I was getting better, but because of the time I got to spend with him. I still remember it like it was yesterday. It was one of those extra sessions, nothing out of the usual. It started out like any other day. The rest of the team had left, and it was just Jackson and me in the pool. I was exhausted, barely keeping up with the drills he was throwing at me, but I refused to quit. After what felt like hours, he finally told me to stop. "That's enough for today," he said, his voice softer than usual. I climbed out of the pool, my body aching from the workout. Jackson handed me a towel, and as I took it from him, our fingers brushed. It was a small, almost accidental touch, but it sent a jolt through me, like I'd been hit by lightning. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, the air between us thick with something I couldn't quite name. Desire? Tension? Fear? Maybe all three. "Archie," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You're doing great, you know that?" "Thanks," I managed to say, my voice coming out shakier than I wanted it to. He didn't move, didn't take a step back like I expected him to. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing against my arm. It was such a simple touch, but it felt like my skin was on fire. Before I knew what was happening, he was closer, his hand trailing down my arm, his eyes never leaving mine. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. "You've got so much potential, Archie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you've got to stop holding back." "I'm not," I started, but he cut me off. "Yes, you are," he said, his hand moving to the back of my neck, pulling me closer. "You've got to let go." And then, before I could say anything else, he kissed me. It was sudden, unexpected, but it felt right, like everything had been leading up to this moment. His lips were warm, insistent, and I found myself kissing him back without a second thought. For a few seconds, nothing else mattered. Not the rules, not the risks, not the fact that he was my coach. All I could think about was how good it felt, how much I wanted him, and for how long I had wanted it without realizing it. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. He looked at me, his green eyes searching mine, and for a moment I saw something vulnerable there, something that made me realize this was just as risky for him as it was for me. "This can't happen again," he said, his voice firm, but there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. But even as he said it, I knew it wasn't true. We both knew that this was just the beginning. Back to present time. "I sort of like him, and I think he likes me too," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Ella blinked, her eyes widening slightly. For a second she didn't say anything, just stared at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Then, slowly she leaned back in her seat, her hands dropping to the table. "Wait, are you saying you and Coach Jackson are involved?" I nodded, feeling the weight of the truth. "It's not like we planned it, it just happened." "Archie, are you serious right now?" Her voice was sharp, not angry but definitely concerned. She leaned in again. "Do you have any idea how risky that is?" "I know," I muttered, slumping in my seat. "Believe me, I know." "No, I don't think you do," she pressed, shaking her head. "We're talking about your coach, a faculty member. This school has strict rules about that kind of thing. If anyone finds out—" "I know, Ella," I cut her off, my voice a little harsher than I intended. "I know the rules. I'm not an idiot." She winced at my tone, but didn't back down. "Then why are you doing this? You could get kicked out. He could lose his job. Everything you've worked for could disappear just like that." I ran a hand through my hair, feeling more defeated than ever. "I don't know what to do. I know the risk. It's different. He's different. I feel drawn to him in ways I never have before." Ella studied me for a long time, her lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, she sighed and leaned back again, crossing her arms. Look, I get that you have feelings for him, but you have to be smart about this, Archie. This isn't high school anymore. You're in college, at one of the best schools in the country. You worked your ass off to get here. Do you really want to throw that away? No, of course not, I said quickly, but I don't want to lose him either. Archie, Ella said softly. I don't know what to do, I said again, my voice quieter this time. I know the risk, it's just, I don't know if I can walk away, I admitted. Ella nodded slowly. I get it, she said softly. You know I'm here for you, just promise me you'll think about it, really think about it. I will, I promise. Though the truth was, I'd been thinking about it nonstop since this whole thing started, and the more I thought about it, the more confused I became. A week later, I thought I was careful, always, maybe not careful enough. How else could this have happened? When I slipped out of Jackson's office late at night after yet another extra session, I knew I shouldn't let my guard down, but still, I didn't see it coming. I was halfway back down to my dorm when Benjamin stepped out of the shadows, leaning against the wall with that smug smile that always made my stomach twist. Hey Archie, he called out, stepping into my path. I instinctively tensed up, feeling the unease creep in. You were out late. Extra swim practice? My heart rate kicked up a notch, but I kept my face neutral. Yeah, what's it to you? He grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble, and pulled his phone from his pocket, casually swiping through something. You know, you're not as sneaky as you think. I froze. A cold wave of fear washed over me as he turned his phone around and showed me the screen. My stomach dropped. There on the screen was a photo of me and Jackson. It wasn't anything too explicit, but it was enough. We were too close, standing in his office after practice, and the way I was looking at him, anyone could see what was going on. My mind raced as I tried to think of how to explain it away, but Benjamin's smirk told me he wasn't interested in my excuses. What do you want? I forced out, my throat dry. He tilted his head as if considering it. Well, I haven't decided yet, but I'm sure we can come to some kind of agreement. Maybe you start swimming a little less. Don't want you showing me up after all. Or maybe I need someone to help me with my grades. You know how hard it is for me to keep up. His words oozed with sarcasm, but the threat was real. If this got out, if the school found out about Jackson and me, it could ruin everything. I clenched my fist, but there was nothing I could do. Not now. Benjamin had the upper hand, and he knew it. I'll think about it, I muttered, hating how weak I sounded. He chuckled and patted my shoulder. Good. It's just I don't think you have much to think about, pal. As he walked away, I felt my world closing in around me. I had no idea how I was going to get out of this. 8 months back. From the very first day, Benjamin had made it clear that he had it out for me. I wasn't sure why at first. Maybe he saw me as competition, or maybe he was just one of those guys who got off on making other people miserable. Either way, he had latched onto me like a parasite. It started in swim practice. I was new to the team, still finding my rhythm, when Benjamin decided to make me his target. Whenever coach wasn't looking, he'd bump into me during laps, splash water in my face, or accidentally kick me as we passed each other in the pool. It was petty, but it threw me off my game. Outside of practice, it wasn't much better. In the hallways, he'd corner me, making snide comments about how I didn't belong at the school or how I was too soft to handle the pressure. He'd knock books out of my hands or trip me just as I was about to walk into class. And then there was the time he messed with my locker. I came to practice one morning only to find my gear soaked in water and my clothes ruined. When I confronted him about it, he just shrugged and said, "What are you gonna do about it, Archie? Go cry to your mama?" It wasn't just the physical stuff, though. Benjamin had a way of getting under my skin mentally, too. At times, he would make me question myself if I really deserved to be at this school, if I could handle the pressure, if I was good enough. But the worst part? He seemed to enjoy every second of it. Whenever I'd falter or lose my temper, he just smiled like he'd won some kind of sick game. I tried to ignore him, tried to brush it off as best as I could, but it wasn't easy. I never really hated anyone, but if I had to pick a name, it'd be his. No competition. And now, with him knowing about Jackson and me, it felt like he finally had all the power he'd been craving. Back to present time. After Benjamin confronted me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that picture. Me and Jackson in his office. Too close for comfort. Benjamin had the power to ruin everything, and I had no idea what to do. The next day, I showed up to practice like nothing had happened, but the whole time anxiety had its claw right at my throat. Every time I looked at Jackson, I couldn't help but wonder if he knew, if he could sense how on edge I was, but I couldn't tell him, not yet. It would just make things worse. "Archie, focus," Jackson called from the edge of the pool. "You're off today. What's going on?" I swam over to the edge, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Just tired, I guess." He frowned, clearly not buying it, but didn't push me. "All right, we'll do some one-on-one drills after practice." I nodded, but inside I was screaming. More alone time with Jackson was the last thing I needed right now. If Benjamin was watching, and I had no doubt that he was, he just added more fuel to the fire. After practice, as the other swimmers left, I stayed behind like usual, but this time, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I glanced around the empty pool, but no one was there. Still, I felt exposed. Jackson walked over to me, his expression softening. "Archie, if something is wrong, you can tell me." I wanted to tell him everything, but the risk was too high. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a smile. "I just need some rest." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go for now. He tried to hug me to comfort me, but I was too paranoid to let that happen. "I gotta go, something urgent," I said and rushed out, knowing well enough how his face must have fallen. About a month later. I never imagined I'd be here in this situation of all places, wearing a suit that's a little too tight around my shoulders, standing next to him of all people. But well, here we were. Benji really milked the cow. If I thought he made my life hell, it was nothing in comparison to what he had been doing to me this past month. Then, a week ago, he caught me off guard, cornered me after swim practice. He looked serious, which was weird because Benji was never serious about anything that wasn't about showing off. He was standing there, crossing his arms, leaning back against my locker like he owned the place. I didn't even have time to brush him off before he dropped the bombshell. "You're going to be my date to the winter ball." I laughed in his face at first. It was just so ridiculous. "Yeah, right, I'd rather drown in the pool." He didn't flinch. "You'll do it, or my hand might just slip and hit send on your picture with your dear coach Jackson." That shut me up fast. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my face neutral, but Benjamin could probably see the panic in my eyes. He just smiled and left. He knew as well as me that as much as it pained me, I had no choice. So, here I am, standing next to Benji at the winter ball, trying not to glare at him while he acts like we're the best of friends. He hasn't even mentioned the blackmail since the day he cornered me, but the threat is still there. The ballroom was decorated in glittering white and silver, with chandeliers hanging above us and soft music playing in the background. People were milling around, chatting and laughing. It should be a good time, but all I can think about is how I ended up here. "You look good tonight," Benji says casually, taking a sip of his drink as he glances around the room. I roll my eyes. "You can drop the act, Benji. We both know why I'm here." He looks at me then, really looks at me, with this odd expression on his face that I can't quite place. "You know, you didn't have to make this so difficult," he says, his voice quieter than usual. "I'm making it difficult?" I shoot back, keeping my voice low so no one nearby overhears. "You blackmailed me into coming here with you. What else was I supposed to do?" He just sighed but said nothing. For some odd reason, he remained on his best behavior throughout the night. Even better, so much so that at one point I found myself enjoying his company. Not that he needed to know it. As the night grew closer, I had to ask the question that had been running around my head since a week ago. Why? Why did you want me to be your date? It couldn't just be to annoy me. Then why, Benji? I asked him, as we went a little outside the hall for a bit of fresh air. He sighs, running a hand through his perfectly styled blonde hair. "You don't get it, do you?" I narrowed my eyes at him. "Get what? That you've been a total ass to me for no reason since day one? Yeah, I get it." Benjamin flinches just a little, but enough for me to notice. He's quiet for a moment, and I start to wonder if maybe I hit a nerve. He's never been the type to show weakness, so seeing even a flicker of vulnerability is weird. We stand there in awkward silence for a few minutes before he speaks again, his voice lower and more serious than I've ever heard it. "Look, I didn't mean for things to be like this." I scoff. "Could have fooled me." He turns to face me fully, his blue eyes locking into mine. There's something in his gaze that's almost nervous? It throws me off balance. "I've been a jerk," he admits, looking down at his feet for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "I know that, but it wasn't because I hated you." Could have fooled me, I repeat, but my voice is softened. There's something about the way he's talking now that makes it hard for me to stay angry. It feels real. Benjamin takes a deep breath, like he's bracing himself for something. I didn't know how else to act around you. What are you talking about? I asked, genuinely confused now. He rubs the back of his neck, glancing away again before forcing himself to look at me. You make me nervous. Wait, what? I like you, Archie. I have for a while now, but every time I tried to talk to you, I don't know, I panicked, so I acted like an ass instead. I thought maybe if I pushed you away, it would be easier to deal with. I stare at him, my mind reeling. I don't even know how to respond to that. Benjamin, the guy who's made my life hell for almost a year, likes me? It sounds insane. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, I finally say, not able to keep the disbelief out of my voice. Benjamin laughs, but it's not his usual cocky laugh. It's more self-deprecating. Yeah, well, I never claimed to be smart when it comes to stuff like this. I shake my head, still trying to wrap my mind around this revelation. So what? You've been tormenting me because you have feelings for me? He winces at the word tormenting, but he doesn't deny it. Yeah, pretty much. I let out a frustrated sigh, running a hand through my hair. This is not how I expected tonight to go. I don't know what you want me to say, I tell him honestly. You can't just treat someone like crap and then expect them to forgive you because you had a crush on them. I know, Benjamin says quickly. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wanted you to know, that's all. We stand there in silence again, the weight of his confession hanging in the air between us. I don't know what to say or even what to think. Benjamin's always been the larger-than-life presence in my world, and now all of a sudden he's just human, flawed, confused, and maybe even a little scared. Archie? Benjamin's voice broke through my thoughts, but I still couldn't form a single word. Instead, I just stared at him. Was he serious? Could he really have feelings for me? And how did I feel about this? Before I could even begin to untangle the mess in my head, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning slightly, I saw Jackson standing in the doorway. He was looking at me. No, us, with an expression I couldn't read at first. But then, without a word, he turned on his heel and walked away. Jackson, wait, I called out, but he was already halfway down the hall. My heart dropped to my stomach. He'd overheard. He must have. And now he was leaving without even giving me a chance to explain. I spun on my heel, muttering a quick, I've got to go, to Benji, and sprinted after Jackson. I followed him through until we reached the swimming pool area. Jackson stood with his back to me, his hands clenched into fists at his side. He didn't move, even when I entered. Jackson, I said softly, approaching him. Please, let me explain. Suddenly, before I could react, he turned around and closed the distance between us in a few long strides, while I backed up, taken aback by his anger until I was pinned against the cold, tiled wall. My breath hitched as he pressed closer, his green eyes blazing with anger. Is that why you went to the ball with him? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. His hand gripped my shoulder hard, and I winced from the pressure. Do you like him now? Is that it? Were you leading me on this whole time? I shook my head, my voice trembling as I tried to speak. No, Jackson, it's not like that. I didn't even... Don't lie to me, he shouted, cutting me off. His other hand grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to make me gasp. He was furious, angrier than I've ever seen him. His face was inches from mine, and for the first time since we started this whole thing, I was afraid of him. Please, Jackson, you're hurting me, I whispered, my voice barely audible as tears filled my eyes. The pain in my wrist was sharp now, and I couldn't stop the tears from slipping down my cheeks. Please stop. Something in his expression changed when he saw the tears. His grip loosened immediately, and he stepped back as if I had burned him. His eyes widened in shock, and he raised his hands in surrender, backing away from me. Archie, I didn't mean... His voice broke, and he took another step back, shaking his head in disbelief. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I stood there, leaning against the wall, clutching my wrist as I tried to compose myself. The tears wouldn't stop, though. My whole body felt shaky, and I could hardly think straight. Jackson had hurt me, and even though I knew it wasn't intentional, it didn't change the fact that it happened. I looked up at him through blurry eyes, seeing the regret and guilt written all over his face, but it didn't matter. Not right now. The pain and confusion inside me were too much to deal with. Without another word, I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. I just needed to get away. Away from Jackson, away from Benjamin, away from everything. 2 weeks later. I'd been avoiding school for the past 2 weeks. I didn't have the energy for classes or the strength to face anyone after everything that had happened. The incident, whatever you want to call it, had left me numb, and I couldn't bring myself to go back. I didn't even know how to explain it to Ella, my best friend, or to anyone else. I looked at my phone as it buzzed with another text from Benji, but, like the rest of texts and calls from Benji and Jackson, I ignored this one too. That was until I heard a knock on my dorm door. I had barely opened the door when Benji pushed past me and walked in like he owned the place. His usual smug grin was missing, replaced by a serious expression that made me nervous. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to sound tougher than I felt. He looked at me with a hint of sympathy in his eyes. "I thought you should know. Jackson resigned. Today's his last day." My heart dropped. Jackson was leaving? I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "What do you mean? Why?" "Don't act like you don't know," Benjamin said, his tone softening a little. "He's leaving because of you, Archie, because of what happened." Without thinking, I rushed out the door. Benjamin's words echoed in my mind as I ran. I couldn't let Jackson leave like this. I had to see him, to make things right. I ran all the way to the pool, my breaths coming in sharp gasps. When I arrived, I found Jackson standing by the pool, his back to me. He was packing up his things, and for a moment, I could see how tired and worn out he looked. The thought that he might be leaving without a proper goodbye hurt more than I'd imagined. "Jackson!" I called out, my voice breaking slightly. He turned around, and the sadness and shock in his eyes was unmistakable. "Archie, why are you leaving?" I demanded, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You can't just walk away." Jackson sighed deeply and ran a hand through his hair. "After what happened, I don't think I have a place here anymore. I've caused too much trouble, and honestly, I don't deserve you." "So what? You can't just leave your job like this. I know how important it is to you." He sighed. "It's all right. Looking for a new job would be less hard than staying here knowing what I have done." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I fought to keep them from falling. "So you're just going to leave me? Just like that?" Jackson's face fell. "I'm sorry, but I think it's best if I go." My heart raced as I tried to gather my thoughts. The idea of Jackson leaving without knowing how I truly felt was unbearable. I took a deep breath, tears streaming down my face. "There's nothing going on between me and Benjamin. I swear, I love you, Jackson." The words came out before I could stop them. As soon as they left my lips, I felt a mix of relief and terror. I'd never said those words out loud before, and now, with the weight of everything crashing down on me, it felt like the only thing that mattered. Jackson's eyes widened in shock. You love me?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "Yes, I do. I've loved you for a long time. I didn't know how to say it, or if you even felt the same, but I couldn't let you leave without telling you." For a moment there was silence between us, filled only with the sound of our breathing. Jackson's expression softened, and I saw the relief in his eyes. I love you too, Archie." Before I could fully process what he said, Jackson closed the distance between us. His lips found mine in a kiss that was both desperate and tender. I could feel all the emotions he'd been holding back, all the longing and regret, and I responded with equal fervor. As we pulled away, I could see the happiness in his eyes, and happiness that mirrored my own. "I'm sorry for everything," Jackson whispered. "I didn't want to hurt you. I thought leaving was the only option." "It should never have been an option in your mind," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you." Jackson nodded, his gaze never leaving mine, before he enveloped me in his arms. We stood there for a while, wrapped up in each other's arms, letting the world around us fade away. At that moment, everything felt right. Conclusion. Jackson still quit, but it was all right as it wasn't me he was leaving. With his credibility, he quickly found another job, and this led to us to finally be open about ourselves. Benjamin eventually backed off, realizing that nothing was going to happen between us. He still gave me a hard time sometimes, but it wasn't as bad as before. He was almost a friend now, a friend who never let me have a peaceful day. I don't know what the future holds for me. There is so much uncertainty. However, this only makes me want to hold on to Jackson and my friends tighter. No matter what tomorrow holds, I plan on making the best of today with all those I love. The end. Have you ever had a crush on your teacher? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. And stay wholesome.